So whatever. I guess we'll do it.
Yep. נכון.
We're on Daf Kuf Yud Dalid Amud Beis. Reish Lakish. Zoso Meres Mitzvah Strichas Kavana. The Mishnah had established in the case where he only has one vegetable, that's all he has is chazeres, and he does tibul rishon with chazeres, he will not recite a bracha of asher kidshon mitzvosov v'tzivonu al achilas maror, even though he's eating maror, because apparently he has in mind that this first tibul is only l'shem hakera, in order to arouse the curiosity of the children, but it is not for the mitzvah of achilas maror. And part of the reason for that, as we'll see, is because the Torah says al matzos umarorim yochluhu, in that sequence, first matzah and then maror. But we wanted to have the first tibul before washing on matzah, so that it's different than the rest of the year, because we never have tibul before we start the meal. And therefore, he has in mind, for the first tibul of maror, in this case where he doesn't have any other yerakos, that this tibul will not be, this achilu will not be for the sake of the mitzvah of maror. Says Reish Lakish, that's only meaningful if we hold mitzvah strichas kavana. And therefore, in this case, he doesn't have kavana to be yotzei the mitzvah of maror. He leaves out the bracha of al achilas maror, because he'll only fulfill that mitzvah of maror when he has kavana to do so with the second tibul of maror. And that's when he'll make the bracha. Kevan delo be'idan chiyuv demaru diachale, since he's not eating it at the time of the chiyuv achilas maror, which means that the achilas maror should be after matzah, and therefore the only bracha he's going to recite is a birchas hanenim on the first tibul of bari pri adama diachale. And therefore, since he's not reciting the bracha of al achilas maror, but only bari pri adama, is v'al v'dilma lo ichavim l'maror. He doesn't have kavana for the sake of maror. And if that is the case, and we're holding mitzvah srichas kavana, that means kavana is absolutely critical for the mitzvah, then he has not fulfilled his mitzvah of maror, despite the fact that he ate maror with the tibul rishon, because let's assume maybe he doesn't have kavana for the mitzvah of maror. Hilkach boilam ehedrat latbule l'shem maror. Therefore, he needs a second tibul, as the Mishnah formulates it, for the sake of the mitzvah of maror after he eats the matzah. Says Reish Lakish, the mitzvah lo boy kavana. If you would argue that mitzvahs do not need kavana, trei lamalach trei tibule vatvil lechadazimna. If mitzvahs ain't in tzrichas kavana, then for sure he fulfills his mitzvah of matzah with the first tibul. And therefore, he should be reciting al achilas maror on the first tibul, and there should be no need for a second tibul. It's totally redundant. Because if mitzvahs lo tzrichas kavana, then he was yotzei the achilas maror with the first tibul, this despite the fact that he didn't have kavana. So why add a second tibul of maror with a bracha of al achilas maror? So what I'd like to do with you now is go through some of the footnotes here in the Masechet, starting with number Aleph. In this first Masechet footnote, he points out that after Kiddush, he recites the Kiddush, and then he eats a Yerek for Tibul Rishon. He hasn't yet even prepared the second kos, and this is what we call karpas. He needs to take the Yerek and dip it into either Meimelach or Chometz, and you could use any Yerek, any Bar Pri Adama will do. In our Mishnah, he did not have access to any Yerakos, very odd scenario. All he had was Maror. And now he's going to do two Tibulim, both with Maror. The first Tibul in Meimelach or in Chometz, and the second in Charosis. The first Tibul without a bracha, just a Bar Pri Adama as a Birchas Hanenim. The second Tibul does not require Birchas Hanenim because he had in mind when he ate the first Chazeres, the first Tibul, that he would pater up the second Tibul of Bar Pri Adama. But the second Tibul, although it doesn't require Bar Pri Adama, nevertheless it requires the bracha of Asher Kitchonim Mitzvot V'Tzivanu Al Achilas Mar. With regard to the second Tibul, Maror means one of 5 subcategories of Maror, and he doesn't have in these 2 Tibulim a Kavana to a Maisa of Tvilas HaYerek. His Kavana is Achila, meaning the mitzvah is not the Tibul, the actual dipping, but rather the eating after you dip it. So we call this Achila Tibul, but really it's Achila, it's not Tibul. Okay. Now we get to slowly but surely understand the logic of Reish Lakish. There is a back and forth in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah about somebody who blows the shofar Rosh Hashanah for the purpose of musical sound, l'shem shir. Has he fulfilled his mitzvah? And Rava, over there in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis, establishes that he was Yotzei when he blows the shofar for musical purposes, because mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. Would kavana be critical in a mitzvah? According to Rava, no. Now, when we say kavana, we mean for the sake of lotzes yidei chovasa. We're not talking about a deeper meaning of what we call pnimius or tamei mitzvahs. That's for sure not critical. You don't have to know anything about the mitzvah. All you have to know is that the Torah commanded you to do it. Now the Torah says al matzos u'merorim, and we derive from this pasuk that lechatchila we should eat the matzah first, and only after that the maror. And the seder is not ma'akiv; it's not critical, but nevertheless, that's the way we should do it: matzah first, maror second. Now, what is this language here? In Reish Lakish, we also got stuck on this. He says, Dilma lo chavin lamar. What do you mean, Dilma lo chavin lamar? I mean, for sure he doesn't have in mind Mara. He's only trying to arouse the curiosity of the children. He's not interested in being Mekayim the mitzvah of Mara. The mitzvah of Mara and its time is after he ate the matzah. He hasn't eaten the matzah yet. So the Rashbam and Tosfos both say that the Dilma language here, that maybe he didn't have Kavana Lamar, is La B'dafka. Don't take it literally. For sure he didn't have Kavana at that moment for the mitzvah of Mar, which he's only going to fulfill later on, after the matzah. Okay, that's number one. So again, getting back to the logic of Reish Lakish. If you're going to hold that what? That mitzvos, tzrichas kavana, I understand now why he needs a second tibul with a bracha of al achilas maror, because in the first tibul he does not have kavana for the mitzvah of maror. As we said before, it's not yet the time for maror. And mitzvah tzrichas kavana, he didn't have kavana for maror in the first tibul. Okay, now we get to something a little bit more complicated, and that's footnote number 5. Hey. And again, we said that he wasn't mechavin l'shei mitzvahs morar on the first round, and we're holding mitzvahs srichas kavana, and that's why he needs the second round. If mitzvahs ain't srichas kavana, he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Tibul aleph would be all he needs. There's no need for a second eating of morar because he was already yotzi his mitzvah morar. That's the old mitzvahs ain't srichas kavana. So the conclusion that we derive from this sugya is that let's take Rav Shita in Rosh Hashanah, mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, and let's recite 2 brachas over chazeres for the first tibul. First, Bari Pri Adama as a birchas hanedim, and then al achilas morar as a mitzvah of achilas morar, and that's it. There's no need for a second tibul. But what we're going to forfeit, what we're going to offer up on the altar, on the Mizbeach here, we're going to sacrifice the mitzvah of eating matzah first, and then eating the morar second. And all this in order to set up Tibul Rishon. And unfortunately, he has no other Yerakos. The only Yerak he has access to is morar. Then he'll combine and collapse both Tibulim into one single Tibul, because he's Yotze the mitzvah of Achilas Mara with the first Tibul. Because mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. Okay. And now we have here footnote number Hey. Now he opens up this discussion with a chashash. You see the word mikor chashash zeh? And this is where the going gets rough over here. Because in the previous footnote, quoting Rashbam and Tosfos, he's already established that the language of Dilma is lav dafka. Because for sure he's not going to have kavana for the mitzvah morar when the zman mitzvah is not yet emerged. It's before the matzah. So what does he mean here? Mikor chashash zeh. Now let's put one very important fact on the table. Even if I hold mitzvah srichas kavana, the possibility exists that when he eats the chazeres for Tibul Rishon, he has no other yerek, he might in fact have kavana for the sake of the mitzvah morar. He's not excited about the proposition that he should eat morar twice. I always used to ask my in-laws when they, Aleim Hashalom, when they came for Pesach, are they excited about having a second Seder, the second night, which they did every year. They always came to us for Pesach, and they had a Seder on the second night. And my father-in-law used to say to me, I can't understand how you could live in Israel with one Seder. He couldn't accept that. You know, it was impossible in his mind. You need 2 starim. So I said, Shver, you know, if it wasn't about morar, I would agree with you. But to eat morar twice, you know, it's enough I ate morar on the first night. I'm not excited about morar on the second night. He poo-pooed it. But in this case, let's say a person has no other yerek. He knows he needs a tibul rishon with the yerek, but he only has chazeres. That's the only thing he has in his closet. He's not excited about eating a second morar. One's enough. So he's going to have kavana with that first tibul that he wants to be yotze the mitzvah of morar. And if that be the case, if he's going to eat a second mara later and make a bracha, al achilas mara, it's a bracha levatola. He was already yotzei the mitzvah with his first. So again, he doesn't specify who says this. I'm a little bit up in the air here. Maybe you can set the record straight for me. But he says, because we're afraid that maybe he'll have kavana on the first tibul for the mitzvah of marar, take nu chachamim, shali olam lo yiskavin lotzes yidei chovas marar b'tibul rishon. We don't want to have this shadow over our head, hanging over our head, maybe at kavana, and maybe therefore he will make a bracha v'atol if he makes a bracha on the second mar. So the Rabbanan made a takana li olam lo yiskavin l'shem chov. Again, you might ask me, how can we rely on that takana? I mean, he may or may not know about that takana. That's the missing piece of this puzzle. That's why it becomes very confusing to me, very challenging. He says, "Takanas chachamim shelo yiskavi b'tibul rishon." Now, if you hold mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, then the story becomes even more challenging, because then for sure he was yotzi with the first chazeres. So it seems that from the perspective of the Mandiyama who holds mitzvahs tzrichas kavana, we would like to have two different tibulim. We're not going to encourage him to have kavana on the first tibul for the mitzvah more. On the contrary, we're going to make a takana that he should not have to. Why? Because apparently we would like to have a double tibul. What do they call it? Double dipping? Why do we want double dipping? Because that's going to stimulate the curiosity of the child. Not only is it odd in the eyes of the observant child, if he's a good observer, that we did the first tibul before the Suda, that in and of itself is a shidui, but moreover, two tibulim, both with marar. That's unheard of. So bishleim, if I hold mitzvah srichas kavana, now I can understand how the chachamim could solve the problem of a person who only has chazeres and yet get two tibulim with a bracha on the second tibul. How do they accomplish that goal? Through mitzvah srichas kavana, make a takana that he should never have kavana to be yotze with the first tibul. And mitzvah srichas kavana means a kavana is critical to set up a mitzvah, and he had kavana shalol l'shem mitzvah. That was the takana. But if I hold mitzvah ain't srichas kavana, then I'm really in a dilemma. How can we accomplish our goal of having two tibulim? And the answer is that Mishnah reflects the shita of mitzvah srichas kavana, therefore it is able to achieve two tibulim. But had our Mishnah accepted the shita of Rava that mitzvahs ain't srichas kavana, then one tibul would suffice, even without kavana. He was yotzei his mitzvah mar. So you can understand here that in the light of the fact that Rava in Masechet Rosh Hashanah maintains that mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, we have here a vested interest, call it an agenda, to try to reinterpret our Mishnah in such a way. When I say reinterpret, I mean as opposed to Reish Lakish's understanding of our Mishnah, in such a way that we can reconcile our Mishnah with the Mandiyama who holds mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. I would say the following. This is my own thoughts. If you have any other thoughts, please tell me. That just like we make it a takana, according to the Mandiyom Mitzvah Srichas Kavana, we make a takana that no one should have Kavana to be Yotze with the first Tibul. And therefore we're going to achieve our goal of having 2 Tibulim of Morah. According to Mandiyomar Mitzvahs Ein Srichas Kavana, we make a different takana. That takana will be that he has Kavana Shalo Lotzes. And even if I hold Mitzvahs Ein Srichas Kavana, and Kavana is not a critical requirement, an ingredient in the mitzvah, but nevertheless, if he has a definite Kavana Shalo Lotzes, that's a positive negative. He has a definite Kavana Shalo Lotzes of a negative. That's the takana. And then we can have 2 Tibul. Now, I think, Steve, you mentioned a few days ago, remind me, that for the first Tibul, we don't take a Kazayas. Is that correct? You mentioned that to me. Truth be told, that you're right, but you're not 100% right. What do I mean? La'aloch l'maisa, you're right. I think that's the minhag in Kol Yisrael. You read it in the instructions in the Haggadah. But there is another opinion, a school of thought, that requires Kizayis for the first Tibul, for Karpas. The Rambam is amongst them. And in that light, we understand our Gemara. Our whole Gemara of Reish Lakish is predicated on a chashash, a problem that maybe he was Yotzi already with the first Tibul. But you just finished telling me that he eats less than a Kazayis on the first Tibul. So what's the problem over here? What's Reish Lakish racking his brains? He's trying to figure out how can we justify 2 Tibulim? He was already Yotzi with the first Tibul, and Reish Lakish finds only one solution, and that's Mitzvah Srichas Kavana. And as we saw, we're going to make a takana that he should have Kavana, that he's going to eat a second Tibul. What are you hacking about here? Yeshli pitaron pashut. I'll solve your problem by just telling you that Karpas is less than a Kazayis. In which case he cannot be Yotzi the mitzvah of Achilas Morah, even if the Karpas is Morah. And that's what he says here in footnote number 6. Very lumdish footnote. He says that we already mentioned the Machlokas Rishonim. Do you need for the first Tibul Kazayis? Says the Maral Mi Prague, I'm going to prove to you that you need a Kazayis for the first Tibul. How? If you don't need a Kazayis, what's Reish Lakish hacking here? What's his problem? He already was Yotzi with the first Tibul. No, he wasn't Yotzi with the first Tibul. He ate less than a Kazayis. So that's the Maral Mi Prague, 5 centuries ago. Now we fast forward to the Karban Nisan, the Nisan Yuval. He lived about 200 years ago. He says, Kavanas Reish Lakishi, Shamishna v'chayeves litbol tibul sheni b'chal mikra. The Mishnah requires a second tibul unconditionally, straight across the board. Bein emachal v'tibul rishon pachas mikazayis ubein emachal kizayis. So basically, the Karban Nisanel is adding 2 words here. B'chol mikra. I mean, those are the 2 words we want to underline. B'chol mikra. You have it in number 6. So the Karban Nisanel wants to read the Mishnah the following way. Heviu lefonav matzah, chazeres, and charoses. And then the Mishnah says what? is Ushnei Tavshil. Basically, the Mishnah is just telling you that we're going to bring out Chazeres a second time. For what purpose? For a tibul. The Mishnah doesn't make it conditional on the fact that he ate a kizayis in the first tibul of Chazeres. The Mishnah sounds like what we call stama, unconditional. As a flat, absolute rule, we need a second tibul. Make sure to bring out the Chazeres with charoses for the purpose of a second tibul. Why? Wasn't he yotze with the first tibul? So it means that now I got it. It means that even if you hold that the first tibul is less than a kizayis, who's going to guarantee? Who's going to take an oath that he only ate pachos mikizayis? Okay, he could have. It would have sufficed if he had eaten pachos mikizayis, but maybe he ate a full kizayis. There's no proof that our Mishnah is assuming, as the Maral would have it, that in the first tibul he ate a kizayis. As if to say the first tibul requires an achila, full-fledged achila of a kizayis. No. The Mishnah would be happy if he ate half a kizayis. That's enough for the mitzvah of tibul rishon. But maybe he ate a full kizayis. And that's where Reish Lakish has his problem. What are you talking about? Mitzvah saying tzrichas kavana. He was yotze then with the first tibul because maybe he had it with kizayis. We're getting into deep water here. He's going to make a bracha of atola, but he was already yotze in the first kizayis. And what's Reish Lakish's solution to that problem? Mitzvah tzrichas kavana. No kavana. But as far as the achila is concerned, although he was not required to eat a kizayis, he may have eaten a kizayis. So therefore, Reish Lakish says, when the Mishnah establishes a second tibul, and you make a bracha on the chazeres in the second tibul, it's an absolute unconditional rule, which means it includes even a scenario in which in the first tibul he ate a kizayis. He didn't have to eat a kizayis. He wasn't required to, but he ate a kizayis. So why do you have this flat absolute rule that he has to have a second tibul? Maybe he doesn't need a second tibul. And if he doesn't need a second tibul because he ate a kizayis in the first tibul, which he didn't have to do, then you're getting into hot water because it's not like, oh, yeah, let's have a second tibul. Very nice. What do we lose by it? Yeah, we lose by it because he's going to make a brach on the second tibul. And the solution to that problem, argues Reish Lakish, is one and only solution, and that is mitzvah tzrichas kavana. We have to train them, and we have to establish that in the tibul rishon they have kavana shelo latzes. And that means that even if they eat a kizayis, they're going to have kavana lo latzes mitzvahs marar, and therefore the Mishnah unconditionally requires a second tibul of chazeres with a bracha on the achilas chazeres. That's the korban hasan. So that's those two words, b'chol mikra, that I asked you to underline. He says, Kavanas Reish Lakish, Isha Mishnah Mechayeves Litbol Tibul Sheni b'chol mikra. Even if he went ahead on his own initiative for no logical reason, and he ate the first tibul of chazeres, a kazayas worth. Oh, now we understand Reish Lakish's problem. If, as chance would have it, he may have eaten a full kazayas for tibul rishon, is for tavel echad zimna. How can you tell me that there's going to be a second tibul with a bracha? Maybe, just maybe, he ate a full kazayas worth on the first round. So there's another word here that I think we should underline, not in the footnote, but in the text itself. If you go back to the beginning of the text on this page and you count down 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, the third word in that line is tzarech. And that's the word that we have to underline here. Tzarech litbol pam shenis. And now the Kavana is reading it through the eyes of Reish Lakish in his understanding that Sarech Litbol Pam Shenis, even if he may have eaten the first Chazeres and Tibul Rishon of full Kazayas. Sarech Litbol Pam Sheni. In order to set up the Mitzvah Mor. Frekt Reish Lakish, V'dilma lo ichavi lemor. Okay. Now we get to the biggest challenge of the day, and that's footnote number 9. Okay. Reviewing again for the third time the logic of Reish Lakish. Why does the Mishnah require a second tibul? And he wasn't Yotzei Marar in the first tibul. And the answer to that problem is Mitzvah Srichas Kavana. He didn't have Kavana in the first tibul. There's something basic missing here. There's a big gap in the middle of this whole painting of Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is worried about the fact that, this was his question, his kasha, that he may have been Yotzei the mitzvah of Mara with the first tibul. And that's a problem because the Torah says, Al matzah sumrom yochlu, and it's not really the time, the time is not mature for Mara. We have to wait till after the matzah. I don't get it. If that's the issue, drop the first tibul. Why is Reish Lakish doing somersaults in the air to justify the second tibul? Because of the lack of kavana in the first tibul. Why not just drop the first tibul? One tibul should be enough. Unless we assume that Reish Lakish is operating with the concept of Hakera. That we need not just the tibul of Mara later on, but we need the tibul at the beginning, meaning before the meal starts, before the matzah, in order to arouse the curiosity of the children. Harishonim Hikshu. You have it number Zion on the bottom right. Halogami mitzvah srichas kavana. I don't understand. Why does he need a double tibul of charoses? Haridai hoyev tibul asheni, which means after they eat the matzah, and that would accomplish all our goals and avoid the whole problem of maybe he had kavana in the first tibul, and then how could he do a second tibul? V'im, now he uses the word v'im, but l'chora, this would be our answer. Leave out the word v'im. Moda Reish Lakish atibul rishon kideshia hekel utinokos. Right, we need the first tibul before the meal, and a second tibul, which we never have two tibulim, and a tibul before the meal is unheard of. And that's going to arouse the curiosity of the children. Oh, no. We cannot assume that the first tibul is for the sake of Hekero Litinokos. Tim Kain, Nistera Rayosim. Okay, Rabbi, so at this point, I'm going to throw the ball into your court. Because I've been doing all the work today. So you have to share the burden. Let's take a 2-minute pause. And I'm going to ask you, it'll be a race. You know, I have to get pizza for the one who wins the race, I guess. But can you tell me, Im Kain Nistera Rayosam, that the whole proof of Reish Lakish that we're talking about mitzvahs according to the Madhyama Mitzvahs Kavana falls by the wayside? Why? Okay, anybody? Yeah, I just silence is deafening here. Again, let's go over Reish Lakish for the fourth time. Reish Lakish says, why do I need a second tibul if the first tibul was in Mara? And if I hold mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, then for sure he was yotze with the first tibul. So drop the second tibul. And now we're asking, wait a second, we need a second tibul in order to arouse the curiosity of the children. Why does that now completely, completely tear down the whole structure, the whole effort of Reish Lakish? All right, John got an important call, I guess. And there's no proof that mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana.
But the involvement of the children, that's not dependent on him. He's setting up the involvement of the children, but it's the children need to see the second tibul for them to be interested. And the fact that he had kavana for the first tibul is irrelevant. So it's not a matter of his kavana, it's how the children see it. They don't see a second tibul, so they're not involved, they're not interested.
Excellent. I just want to add one word. Even if I hold mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, and therefore Reish Lakish is arguing, if so, he was yotze with his first mitzvah, his first tibul, I need the second tibul for the hekeru l'tinokos. So what's the problem that he's raising here? According to the Mandiyom, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, he was yotze with the first tibul. Who cares whether he was yotze with the first tibul? As Jeff says very well, we need to arouse the curiosity of the children. So we certainly need the second tibul. Imkein nister arayosam, sharei gam in mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, we still need a second tibul kedei shei hekel l'tinokos. And now we fast forward to the Tosas Rabbeinu Peretz. But I would say the following, that there are two stages in this Gemara. We're at the early stage of Reish Lakish, where Reish Lakish wants to prove that mitzvah strichas kavana, because otherwise you don't need a second tibul. At this point, we're not operating within the framework of Hekera. Reish Lakish is completely, totally focused on the mitzvah mara. While it is true that Reish Lakish may, and the Gemara may have eventually, at stage number 2, accept the proposition that we need 2 tibulim for Hekera, but at this point we're not focusing on Hekera. We're not even aware of Hekera. So, for example, if you take a look at the next line in the Gemara where we're holding, Mimai, how does Reish Lakish know that mitzvah strichas kavana, dilma liol mitzvah ain't strichas kavana to utika amrit? And now Reish Lakish, you're arguing, so why are we doing a second tibul? He was yotzi ready with the first tibul because mitzvah ain't strichas kavana. The answer is ki hechid delevi hakera l'tinokos. In other words, the Gemara was naive in a sense until this point. The Gemara was operating without the assumption of Hekera l'tinokos. The only problem I have is if the Gemara didn't know about Hekera l'tinokos, so why do we have 2 tibulim? All he has in his closet is chazeres. Let him be yotze with 1 chazeres. The Mishnah says he's got to eat 2 chazeres. And not only that, I don't even know why, in general, how do I justify the first tibul? Well, what's the purpose of the first tibul? We did not know of Hekera l'tinokos? So that's an interesting question of itself. Like the Gemara says, oh, mimai, maybe we need 2 tibulim for Hekera l'tinokos. Why? And what were you thinking until that point? How did you simply translate the Mishnah? The Mishnah requires 2 tibulim. It wasn't because of Hekera l'tinokos? you get the impression that there was, in the Havamina, there was some other reason for two tibulim. I mean, who can figure that out? That's a toughie. V'tiritz Tosas Rabbeinu Peretz, Reish Lakish bevada yodash hatzorach l'shnei tibulim mishum heker, el shagmar lo omdal kavanas dvarav, v'savrav sherayasa imikoch hakusha madu etzorach shtei tibulim. Mitoch hamasu matan b'gemara misbareres l'basov kavanas Reish Lakish sherayasa mishum she'im kavanos hatano lashmeinu shnei tibulim rak mishum heker, hoyeroy lo lasok b'ofen shatibul arishon who b'shar Yerakos. Umikevan shenokan atana ofen shetibul shel shnei tibulim b'chazeres, mashma shekavanos lashmiya shebetibul arishon klal lo yotze yidei chovaso. So Rabbeinu Peretz builds an entire case on the following question on the Mishnah. Why did the Mishnah talk about tibul rishon b'chazeres? He has nothing else in his closet, no other vegetables, just chazeres. Why? It must be telling me a chiddush about the mitzvah of Maror. It's not coincidental that the Mishnah mentioned that the first tibul in this particular scenario was b'chazeres. It must be telling me a chiddush that even though the first tibul was b'chazeres, he still needs another tibul for the mitzvah of Maror. If the Mishnah had simply wanted to establish that we need two tibulim in order to arouse the curiosity of the children, then why do you come up with this? Why did the Mishnah come up with this strange scenario where he has no other vegetables other than chazeres? It must be telling me a halach in chazeres, meaning in the mitzvah of Maror. And what's the Kavana of the Mishnah? That even though he ate the Maror in Tibul Rishon, since his goal was not for the sake of the mitzvah of Maror, but rather to set up this curiosity for the children, therefore he's not Yotze with the first Tibul. So the extra chiddush of the Mishnah by presenting a strange scenario where he has no vegetables other than chazeres is to tell me that although he ate chazeres, he needs a second tibul of chazeres, midin chazeres, and he wasn't yotze his chazeres with the first chazeres. That's Rabbeinu Peretz. And hence we understand Reish Lakish, why wasn't he yotze his mitzvah chazeres with the first chazeres, and that's because mitzvah srichas kavana. Okay, now he has another answer in the name of Tosfos. Reish Lakish yada she'echad hatibulim hu l'tzarech heker. Ach heven midivrei HaMishnah shemutar l'chatchil litbol et shnei hatibulim v'chazer, so yein tzorech lachzor ach Yerakos acherim. V'din zeh misyashiv rak in mitzvah srichas kavana. Sheni yotze klal yidei chovas mar b'tibul rishon. L'chein ein chashash l'shtamish oz b'chazeres hacha im mitzvah sricha einan srichas kavana. Yotze yidei chovas mar b'tibul rishon. Ketzad natu lo l'shtamish bo Ketzad natu lo l'shtamish bo l'chatchilu b'chazeres l'haktim es kiyum ha-mitzvahs moror terem zman. In other words, we've been assuming all along that he has nothing in his closet in our Mishnah other than chazeres, no other vegetable. Wait a minute. Why doesn't he get off his high horse and make sure and guarantee that he has another yerek? Why are we telling him, being perfectly complacent, you have a yerek, you have chazeres? We shouldn't be telling him that. Why not? Because if mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, and he was yotzei therefore with the first tibul, then he forfeits the din kedima of matzah before Mara. Do you hear this? It's a brilliant chap. He's saying the Mishnah is not even blinking about the fact that he has chazeres and he's going to use the chazeres for his first tibul. We're not even going to request of him to make an extra effort to find another yerek. Why? If mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavana, he certainly was yotzei his mitzvah of Mara with the first kizayis of chazeres that he ate, and now he forfeits the kiyum of matzah umarorim yochlu, matzah first and Mara second. Says Reish Lakish, you know why the Mishnah is not at all inhibited about letting him use the Mara for the first tibul? It's because mitzvah tzrichas kavana, and he doesn't have kavana for the first tibul. But Einoch Hinami, he says Reish Lakish, if mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, then the Mishnah is awry. It's off base. The Mishnah should not have allowed him carte blanche. Okay, use chazeres, because by doing so, the Mishnah is going to force him, so to speak, to forfeit the kiyum of matzah first and Mara second. Wow. Okay, Rabbosai. So where are we up to here? Let's just do the following. We'll read through the Gemara's rejection of Reish Lakish and the Gemara's reconciliation of our Mishnah with the Mani Yom Mitzvahs Ein Tzrichas Kavana, and then we'll point out that we have here cut out for us the work of footnote number 8, which we'll leave for tomorrow. So Gemara says, "Mimai Dilma Leon Mitzvahs Ein Tzrichas Kavana Ude Ka Amrit Trei Tibule Lamali." And Lachari was Yotzi with the first tibul. And if he was Yotzi with the first tibul, he forfeits the kedima of matzah tomorrow. Kiechid Levi Kerilitinokos. And Achinami was Yotzi with the first tibul. Mitzvah Saint Tzrichas Kavana. And therefore we're going to forfeit the kedima. But we'll achieve the goal of Heker Tinokos. So the goal of Heker Tinokos trumps the kedima halach. But now I don't understand. Why didn't the Mishnah say, go out and find, beg, borrow, and steal a yerek? So you don't have to forfeit kedima. This I don't understand. All right then, so we got our work cut out for us.